I never thought a simple glance could destroy everything I cherished. Looking back, it's strange how betrayal never announces itself. It grows quietly, disguised as familiarity, comfort, and trust. Sarah and I had been best friends since we were 10. We'd survived teenage heartbreaks, shared dorm rooms, and once even promised to be each other's maid of honor. She was the kind of friend who remembered the smallest things, how I took my tea, how silence made me anxious, how I'd always wanted a quiet life. When she met Daniel, I remember thinking she'd finally found someone who understood her the way I did. Daniel was polite, thoughtful, the kind of man who made everyone around him feel seen. He wasn't loud or overly charming. His strength was in subtle gestures, the way he listened, how he spoke your name as if weighing it carefully before releasing it into the air. When they married, I stood beside Sarah with tears in my eyes, genuinely happy for her. I meant every word of my speech that day, to my best friend and her forever love. Over time, I became a fixture in their lives. Sarah and I spent lazy Sundays at their place, laughing over old jokes while Daniel cooked. When the daughter, Emma, was born, I was, auntie, always welcome, always trusted. I loved that little family. They were the closest thing I had to one of my own. It started with moments so small they seemed harmless. Daniel would remember things I'd forgotten I'd said, like my favorite brand of coffee, or how I hummed when I concentrated. Once, he fixed the clasp on my necklace when Sarah was in the other room. His fingers brushed my neck, and for a second too long, neither of us moved. I laughed it off, grateful for the help, but something inside me shifted, a flicker of awareness I didn't want to name. I told myself it was nothing. People misread gestures all the time. But afterward, I noticed more, the way his eyes followed me during conversations, how he'd linger when saying goodbye. Every time, I convinced myself it was coincidence. Sarah adored him. He adored her. That was all that mattered. Still, sometimes, when I caught his reflection in the glass during dinner, I felt a strange unease, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering how far the drop really is. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Sarah teased him for burning the pasta. He laughed and met my eyes across the room. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. There was nothing romantic, nothing overt, but something unspoken passed between us, fragile and dangerous. I blinked, broke the gaze, and forced a smile. Sarah didn't notice. She was humming, her hand resting easily on his shoulder, perfectly at peace. I told myself I would forget that look by morning. But as I drove home, the memory of it stayed, quiet, persistent, and wrong. And somehow, I knew that something had already begun to unravel. It happened one rainy afternoon, when the world outside seemed blurred and weightless. Sarah had asked me to drop off a book she'd borrowed, a novel we'd once stayed up all night discussing. She was running late from work, so she told me to leave it with Daniel. I almost didn't go inside. Almost. Daniel opened the door with his usual calm smile. The faint scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the soft hum of rain filled the silence between us. "You can wait inside if you want," he said. "She shouldn't be long." His tone was casual, friendly, the way it always was. I nodded and stepped in, shaking off the rain from my coat. The house felt warmer than usual, quieter too. Emma's toys were scattered across the floor, the television off, a candle burning on the counter. It was an ordinary scene, yet something about the stillness pressed against my chest. Daniel poured me a cup of tea without asking how I took it. He already knew. I tried to thank him lightly, to keep the air untroubled, but when our eyes met, something shifted, subtle, heavy, and undeniable. His gaze wasn't searching or invasive. It was something else, something that felt like recognition. As if he saw a part of me I had tried for years to hide. I looked away first, pretending to focus on the rain trickling down the window. The sound filled the room like a heartbeat. I could feel him watching me, though I told myself I was imagining it. "Sarah's lucky," I said quickly. "You take care of her so well." He gave a small laugh. "She deserves that. She's good, better than I am." There was a tired honesty in his voice that caught me off guard. I glanced at him, his shoulders slightly slumped, eyes distant. "We've both been busy," he added. I wanted to change the subject, to ask about work or Emma, anything to pull us back to safe ground. But I didn't. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was intimate, fragile. Dangerous. When I stood to leave, my hand brushed the edge of his as I set down my cup. A spark of warmth shot up my arm, and I pulled away too quickly. The teacup wobbled, spilling a drop across the table. We both froze. He reached for a napkin, smiling faintly. "You've always been clumsy," he teased. His voice was softer than it should have been. I mumbled something about the rain and hurried to the door. As I stepped outside, the air felt sharp, almost cleansing. I told myself it was nothing, that we were both adults, capable of boundaries. But that night, as I sat staring at my phone, a message appeared. "Did I make you uncomfortable?" My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. It wasn't supposed to happen. But loneliness has its own language, soft, persuasive, and far too easy to misunderstand. Weeks passed after that afternoon, and I tried to forget the message. Sarah was her usual radiant self, talking about work deadlines and planning Emma's birthday. I convinced myself that whatever existed between Daniel and me was just an illusion, a trick of circumstance. But denial has limits, and mine began to crumble the evening she asked me for help. Sarah had a last-minute business trip. "Could you check in on Daniel and Emma while I'm gone?" she asked, hugging me tightly. "He's been exhausted lately." I smiled, pretending calm. "Of course," I said. Inside, something twisted. On the second night of her trip, Daniel called to ask if I could come over. He was putting together a surprise video for Sarah's upcoming birthday and needed my help with the editing. It sounded harmless enough. I agreed. When I arrived, the house was dimly lit, quiet except for the faint hum of rain against the windows. The smell of coffee hung in the air, comforting and disarming. We sat at the dining table, sorting through clips of Sarah laughing, playing with Emma, singing off-key in the car. Daniel chuckled softly. "She hates her voice," he said, his eyes warm. "But that's the sound I miss most when she's away." His honesty disarmed me. I should have left then. But I didn't. As we worked, our hands brushed more than once, accidental at first, then not. A silence grew between us, thick, charged, unspoken. He looked at me, and this time I didn't look away. I wish I could say I didn't know what was happening. But I did. Every instinct screamed for me to stop, to walk out into the rain, to remember who I was and what Sarah meant to me. Yet when he whispered my name, softly, almost apologetically, something inside me yielded. What happened next was quiet. No passion, no fire, just two lonely people stepping across a line they could never uncross. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, as if the sky itself disapproved. When morning came, the light felt cruel. Daniel barely spoke as he made coffee. I stared at the floor, my stomach heavy with shame. "We can't let her know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It would destroy her." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Destroy her." The words rang like a sentence. Later, when Sarah called to check in, I forced a smile into my voice. She thanked me for helping with the video, her tone warm, trusting. I wanted to confess right then, to beg forgiveness before the truth hardened into deceit. But cowardice is easy when the person you've wronged still loves you without suspicion. That night, as I lay awake, the sound of rain returned, steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. And I knew there would be no forgetting what we'd done. Secrets have a way of finding their way home. You can bury them under guilt, smother them with denial, but they breathe in the silence between conversations. I learned that the hard way. Sarah came back from her trip glowing with gratitude. She hugged me so tightly that I almost confessed right there, but Daniel's eyes caught mine over her shoulder, a quiet warning, or maybe a plea. I smiled instead, and the lie began to live inside me. Days turned into weeks. On the surface, everything looked the same. We had our usual coffee dates, laughed about work, swapped parenting advice. But I could feel the weight of my deceit in every shared glance, every unspoken word. I began to dread her calls, her visits, her kindness. It was unbearable to be loved by the person you'd betrayed. Then came the night it all unraveled. Sarah texted me, "Can I come over?" And before I could reply, she was at my door. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. "Tell me it isn't true," she said, voice raw. My mouth went dry. Behind her words was something fragile, desperate, begging for a lie that could save her world. She held out her phone. A single message thread glowed on the screen. Daniel's name, my name, fragments of words we'd tried to erase but hadn't. One mistake. One unsent draft. My throat tightened as I tried to speak, but no sound came. I wanted to believe you, she whispered, tears catching in her lashes. But I already knew. Silence filled the space between us, heavy and merciless. I wanted to reach for her, to explain, to undo what couldn't be undone. But how do you explain betrayal to the person who trusted you most? Sarah left that night without another word. Daniel moved out a month later. The house that had once been filled with laughter stood empty, a monument to everything we destroyed. I stopped answering messages, stopped meeting friends. The whispers came eventually. Neighbors, co-workers, the quiet judgment of people who didn't need the full story to understand the shape of it. I spent long nights replaying every moment, trying to trace where the line had first blurred. Was it the glance, the touch, the silence I mistook for meaning? Or was it loneliness pretending to be love? I wrote letters I never sent, to her, to him, to myself. In one of them I confessed, it wasn't passion that ruined us, it was weakness disguised as need. Now, when I think of Sarah, it's not the anger I remember but the quiet grief in her eyes, the look of someone realizing that even love has limits. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in friendship. I always say yes, but when they ask about forgiveness, I change the subject. Because some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And mine still does.